In 2023, an extraordinary and extremely unusual 1960s Dalek came to light, tucked away at the back of a shed in private hands. Over a period of months, it has been painstakingly restored to its former glory, and we've been granted detailed insight into the restoration process, during which time its screws, dents and scratches have been meticulously examined. The evidence revealed to us a type of Dalek which was unique in Dalek history, in its design features, its construction method, its colour scheme, and the way it was used on screen. Following the clues to track its identity led us on a remarkable journey across Europe, not literally, and revealed some bizarre choices taking place at the height of Dalek mania. This is the story of a strange Dalek design variant that's been hiding in plain sight. It's another cracking mystery for the Dalek detectives. If you'd like to support our research, contribute ideas, and see clips and early videos, then check out the link in the description on how to join our Patreon. In 1965, a Dalek movie starring Peter Cushing as Doctor Who exploded into cinemas. The movie is a feast for the eyes and a lot of fun for Dalek fans, but even the more astute viewers might not have noticed that this film includes a unique Dalek design hiding in plain sight. The hero Daleks used in this feature film were made by Shawcraft Models, who supplied all the hero props for television throughout the 1960s. Shawcraft made 8 fully operational casings for this movie, comprising 5 standard blue drones, 1 blowtorch Dalek, which we detailed in a previous video, plus 1 red and 1 black casing to function as leaders. But in one memorable scene, the Daleks have a rally ahead of their big dastardly plan, and the control room is filled with props. The 6 blue hero props are in the crowd, taking up the more prominent positions, including the blowtorch Dalek, which tries to blend in. But the other 10 Daleks are very special. Rather than trying to employ a split screen or a matte painting, these really are 10 full-sized casings, but they are quite different to their comrades, and there is some debate over who made them. But before we get into the controversy, let's examine how they were used in the film and see the design feature which sets them apart from every other Dalek. These background props were probably primarily made just for this scene, and as such we tend to call them extras or dummy Daleks, since they never have an operator inside. They are also sometimes termed jelly mold Daleks, for reasons we'll come to. But as well as being scene fillers, the production team were able to use them as effects props for moments when they did not want to risk damage to the hero props. And in fact, the very first glimpse of one in the movie is for a pyrotechnic effect. When the blowtorch Dalek finishes its cutting work, another unit pushes down the door, revealing the Dalek in which Ian has escaped, except that this is not the prop in which Ian escaped. This is one of the dummies. The most distinctive feature of these extras, which can be spotted at a distance, is on the collars around the shoulders. Normal Daleks have collars that narrow towards the gun boxes, but these Daleks' collars cut backwards at an angle before running forwards, which creates a sort of zigzag effect. The next time one of these dummy props is seen is on the screen of the Dalek control room, as the leaders keep an eye on the test subjects in their lab. It's conspicuously the only Dalek which isn't moving. It's a little hard to see in this view, so in case you don't believe us, there are photos taken on set which show the props in splendid detail. In these high-resolution images, the difference in finish between the surfaces of the dummy on the left and the hero prop on the right is plain to see, and we'll discuss why this might be and who was responsible in a moment. When you can't see them in close-up, another design choice which makes them easy to spot at a distance is clearest in the chanting scene when they can be compared to the main Daleks. The dummy Daleks have a pure silver base colour on the skirt and shoulders, whereas almost all the hero props have a blue tinge to their base coat. The contrast can be seen more clearly if we boost the saturation a little and look at the two props either side of the red Dalek, and that's the silver dummy on the right. Although things aren't entirely black and white, or rather silver and blue, because over on the left is a hero prop with pure silver shoulders. And in this shot, the hero Dalek on the right has a silver skirt, but as a rule, the dummies are all silver. For this scene, the electricians have wired up every pair of lights to a single switch so that the chanting appears in perfect unison, which means there are a lot of trailing cables hidden from the camera, although some wires can be seen in behind-the-scenes photos. These images once again show the dummy props far more clearly than was ever intended, and a front angle like this gives us a good look at the collars, where you might notice that the build construction is somewhat different to the hero prop on the right. The next time a dummy is seen, it's once again employed as a stunt Dalek during the Thal's incursion into the city. For the build-up, a hero prop is used and the rope is looped over its head, but when the shot cuts, it's become one of the jelly mold stand-ins. The lights are wired up to flash to bring it to life, it has articulated limbs, and the eye comes off on impact with the wall. In this shot of Ian leading the Thal's advance, this is a dummy stationed in the control room in the distance, again incongruously standing still whilst the rest of the shot is bursting with activity. An on-set photograph provides an excellent side view of this dummy, and again shows its uneven surface, but it's a definite benefit to the shot in the movie, and I'm surprised that the plethora of spare casings wasn't used more often in this way. If I was to speculate, I'd suggest maybe they were a late idea, built after the production started, and maybe that's why they don't appear until beyond the halfway point of the movie, after which they appear in 3 different places, not including the effects work. Thanks to this prominent scratch on the third panel on the right side, we can determine that this is the same prop that was used in the testing lab, which in itself is curious, as it implies this prop was more handy, more mobile, or perhaps finished before the others. The final use in the film, however, does very prominently show the imperfections, as this dummy Dalek is grabbed from close to the camera and flung into the corner where a pyrotechnic is set off. In fact, it's the demise of the dummy Dalek which spells the beginning of the end for the evil aliens, as this explosion damages the electronics of the Dalek city enough to plunge the control room into darkness, which foreshadows or perhaps inspires the more severe inflicting of damage which stops the countdown and saves the planet. In this destructive climax, a dummy Dalek is placed close to the control panel and rigged to explode. An on-set photo shows us something interesting that's never seen on screen. The dummy Dalek has come apart in the middle during a struggle or the collision, and the top is resting to the side. What's a little tricky to discern in this photo, due to the smoke, is whether the upper part of the Dalek is still present. The neck and dome almost certainly are there and just obscured, and we can say that quite confidently because of the key secret behind these cheaply made casings. Unlike the hero props, which were cast from multiple pieces in smooth fiberglass molds, which were then carefully assembled, these dummy Daleks were cast in large chunks to save time. The neck section, for example, on the main props, consists of a cage made from 3 rings and 8 rods, and a drum inside with a mesh surface so that the operator could see out. But on the dummy props, this entire piece is a continuous solid surface. This meant that when the dummy here was exploded, its neck had to be cut away to resemble a more typical cage so that the explosion could more effectively erupt from inside. And instead of building a skirt section, cutting 56 holes and mounting 56 separate hemispheres, the extra Daleks had their bumps formed as part of the surface, so they were cast just like a jelly in a patterned mould, hence the nickname. In order to create the enormous mould from which duplicates could be cast, an original pattern or plug had to be created, i.e. a full-size Dalek shape was made to be copied. When making a mould, you have to completely encase an object, but if you have any undercuts or anywhere that the moulding material can creep in, then the mould will be permanently entangled and locked into the original object. So the original Dalek shape which was copied could not have been a normal Dalek which was full of fiddly details. It would have to be custom made to avoid any undercuts. The Dalek pattern would not have had any mesh in the neck section, nor could the hemispheres have featured the usual little channel around them caused by them being pushed through from the inside. A very noticeable consequence of the need to create more simple shapes that could be easily moulded is the eye stalk. Normal Daleks have a set of slender discs, but to make a chunkier pattern which would be more easy to remove from a mould, the core of this set of shapes is a large lump. This is a very clever shortcut because unless the props are seen from the side, the outermost discs obscure the bulbous middle. And this helps us to understand how the dummies ended up with the distinctive zigzag collars. Because the hero Daleks had collars that were cut separately from aluminium and screwed on, with a spacer holding them away from the shoulder section below. But this creates a void beneath, which means a mould cannot be taken because of the undercut. So it looks as if a set of bare shoulders had solid collars sculpted in clay, and then a mould was taken of those. But the sculptor seems to have got confused about the geometry of the collars and sculpted the angles backwards. This contemporary sketch showing the Daleks' measurements is interesting, as it shows the zigzag shape. If this was an inaccurate, hasty drawing of a hero prop, then used as reference, perhaps it resulted in the mistake being transferred to the dummy props. But it could also have been drawn based on the dummies themselves, so perhaps we can't draw any conclusions. But who made these jelly mould Daleks? In Doctor Who magazine long ago, it was stated that the props were made at the plaster workshops in Shepperton, where the movie was being shot, and they were said to be half the cost of the main Daleks. It's unknown what the source is for this information, but it's generally accepted to be true. And yes, that's plaster workshops, not plastic workshops. Timber and plaster having been the basis for building sets and large props for decades. But that was all changing with the introduction of plastics reinforced by fibres of glass. If these props were made at Shepperton, it's perhaps because of their inexperience that the surface of the Daleks came out so rough, compared to those made by Shawcraft, who were specialists in fiberglass. But equally, if the original Dalek builders, Shawcraft, had been commissioned to make the dummies, then they would have done them hastily and knowing that they did not need to stand up to close scrutiny on screen, so this alone might account for the rough finish. What I think confirms that they were made at Shepperton is the error of creating the zigzag collars. Since Shawcraft helped originate the iconic Dalek design, and had made at least 15 of them by this point, it feels like something they wouldn't get so badly wrong. Similarly, with the colour scheme, the silver finish strikes me as the result of someone having to approximate the correct paint if they didn't have the original pigment. And the fact that some sections of hero Daleks are also silver might be evidence for them being repainted at Shepperton. But then, on the other hand, all the bits needed to make the Dalek pattern itself would surely have originated from Shawcraft. Perhaps it was a joint venture necessitated by the tight schedule or the budget, with Shawcraft delivering 8 hero props and 1 prototype dummy, and then Shepperton cast up the rest. These brief glimpses are the only time that the zigzag Dalek design has ever appeared on screen. Fast forward 60 years, and we receive an email from a lovely chap called Ivan, who showed us a photo of his Dalek, which was tucked away in storage at the back of his garage. It's exactly the right shape for a 1960s Dalek, and at first glance it looks like it could be one of the hero props, as the collars around the middle have the normal design. But look carefully and you'll see that behind these normal collars is a raised section that reveals this prop's true identity. And here is a photo Ivan shared with us that showed when he bought the prop in 1992, and the zigzag collars are plain to see. So it was easy to verify that Ivan has had an original 1965 movie dummy hiding away for 30 years. But what happened in the intervening decades before he owned it? To work this out, we need to look at what happened after the movie finished shooting, when the publicity drive began. On the 17th of May 1965, a dozen of the props were loaded onto a truck, ready for a long journey to the south of France, where they would be paraded around the Cannes Film Festival. 7 of these casings were the dummies, and this excellent set of photos allows us to spot distinctive bits of damage or bad paintwork, which makes each of them unique. For example, you can see this Dalek has an extra little swish of silver paint encroaching into the black above the lower neck ring. This makes it possible to spot this same Dalek on manoeuvres in other publicity shots. On this other Dalek, its neck section has a big white splodge on the black of the middle of the neck. And on the third right panel of the skirt, there is a lumpy line between the top two hemispheres. And if we switch to a different photo, taken a few seconds later, we see this same Dalek has some more useful identifiers on its right-hand side. The lower collar directly under the arm box has a chip taken out of it. The bottom of the front right panel has some ugly surface features, including a stripe by the bottom hemisphere, and on the fender, the underside edge has been damaged for a length of about 6 to 8 inches. If we want to look for it in the film, we can use the first of the features mentioned to locate it in the chanting scene, where the white splodge is just visible on the neck. The photos of the float once it arrived in France are not great quality, but the splodge is big enough that we can make it out on the Dalek on the left of the row. Upon their return from the trip abroad, the Daleks began a promotional tour of the UK to publicise the movie, and the same dummy Dalek can be seen here in Birmingham in August 1965, with the armbox chip seen on the casing closest to the camera. In this photo taken at Selfridges, we can see the Dalek present is one of the dummies, and the extra little swish of silver on the black near the lower neck ring reveals it to be that other Dalek we singled out being prepared for its trip to Cannes. The Liverpool Echo ran a competition in August, affording readers the opportunity to win a real Dalek. The event was run in conjunction with the Lewis's store in Liverpool, where a display promoting the movie had just been set up. The publicity campaign culminated in a prize giveaway in the magazine TV21. For 3 lucky winners of a Spot the Difference competition, a full-size Dalek as used in the movie would be theirs. In October 1965, the 3 winners were announced. Anthony Barber went home with a red and black hero prop, which was actually a repainted blue casing. Terence Worrell won a black Dalek, and the youngest of the winners was then 6-year-old Keith Stark. Keith had received a knock at the door from a TV21 employee, which informed him that he had won a Dalek which would be presented to him by a pop star called Heinz Burt. A week later, the family went to the Majestic Cinema in South Woodford, and his parents were somewhat mortified at how big their new acquisition was. This photo shows Keith inspecting his prize, and you can see the same chip in the underneath of the arm box, which identifies it as the same Dalek at the back of the chanting scene and that we saw at Cannes. Keith enjoyed its presence for about a decade before selling it to Bishop's Stortford Round Table for £20, after which it underwent some renovations. To appear at their fundraising events, the Round Table made some changes, such as installing flashing lights and cutting a slot in the front so that the operator could see out. This was because, unlike the standard Daleks, who had a partially transparent neck mesh, the dummy Daleks were solid. After about 15 years' service and a bright new paint job, the Round Table sold it at Bonham's auction house in August 1992 to Ivan, who undertook some of his own restoration work, including stripping back the garish red paint job. He wanted to make it more functional, like a real Dalek, so he patched up the letterbox in the front and cut open the neck section so an operator could see in the traditional way. He installed a set of collars which hid the idiosyncratic zigzag shape and painted it up in colours that were more representative of its movie appearance. But after lying dormant for some years, he decided it was time to go the extra mile, and so he employed the services of veteran Dalek builder and historian John Kelly to return it to its screen appearance as authentically as possible. We're extremely grateful to John for recording videos for us as he worked on the Dalek, and here's his appraisal of the overall condition of the casing once he'd nearly finished stripping back the paint.
So I've stripped all the paint off using a fiberglass friendly paint stripper called Marine Strip, but there's still some stubborn patches here and there. There's quite a lot of damage to the underside of the shoulders, drill holes and chips and things like that. I'm going to want to replace this rather rough fill here and make it fit in better with the rest of the front of the shoulders. If we look inside, there's a real bodge job to retain the antennae. The section was stuffed with filler. I've started to chip away at it to get back to the fiberglass. I'm going to fill the antennae holes, re-hole saw them, and fit in wooden antennae retainers like the real props had. There's a fair amount of nasty damage. There's a big hole here that I'm going to need to fill. I do wonder if they used a mixed media mold to make the whole top section. Maybe the shoulder halves were in fiberglass, but I do think the neck section must have been something like silicone, inside a fiberglass jacket. As you know, these neck rods here, they'd be very difficult to release out of a fiberglass mold. They'd lock. So something like silicone, which is flexible, they'd come out easily. And if you look at the neck rings, you can see they're not particularly level, which is the sort of thing that can happen with a flexible mold like silicone. And the casting up this section in fiberglass even then is going to be very challenging. Getting the fiberglass reinforcement into these neck rings and these rods around these sharp angles will be very, very challenging. So you can see there's some sections where the gel coat just hasn't been reinforced, the fiberglass matting hasn't quite gotten in there. At some point in the past it's been chipped away or damaged and we've lost the surface, so more filling. So having taken all that thick paint off, it's really cool to see all the original surface detail reveal itself, and all those quirks and inherent features that you get when you originate from a Shawcraft Dalek. All these lovely lines. You notice that there are a number of areas which have this sort of browny rust colour. These are areas of exposed fiberglass matting. After the gel coat's been lost. Maybe the previous owner, when they stripped the paint back, they had to sand some stubborn patches. I'm not sure where the rusty tint comes from. You can actually see that on the inside of the dome as well. If you look at the section above this Hemi here, on panel L3, you can see a bit of a thermal distortion that helped John Green identify which prop this was in the movie. Then the most challenging part of the skirt restoration is probably going to be the fender. It's clearly taken some pretty severe damage at some point, and the repair is pretty crude. There's a metal plate behind this section, and on top of it they covered it with loads of filler. There's this pink sort of fiberglass filler and a P38 sort of car filler smeared over here. Not actually properly catalyzed, so some of it's very soft. So if you look, there's a piece here I've removed already. You can see how thick it is. So obviously you want to restore this as close as possible to its screen-use state, so all of this is going to have to go. Obviously retain any original material that's present underneath it, but everything else needs to be refashioned and made good again. Here's another large section where the gel coat's gone. We've got this rusty colour sort of coming through, so I'll probably give this a coat of surface primer than level it out. And here's the front join line of the skirt, where the two halves were put together. And here's the join at the rear. This is interesting. I think, if you made the mold for this, or cast up the two halves down the middle, it would be very difficult to release, but by angling it, you can kind of swing the two halves of the mold off. And if you look closely at the back corner here, you can see this the tip of this strip of metal, which is running all the way down the panels, the join panels. And they must have braced the two halves together, fitted that metal strip of reinforcement, then fiberglassed all around the inside of the skirt to bond the two halves together. There's quite a lot of flex in this skirt around the join lines, and there's hairline fractures running down both join panels, right? And look, there's a huge bit of damage at the back here where it just cracked totally away, and a few hairline cracks down here. And I'm going to need to make this skirt solid before I fill all these cracks and make it good again. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to reinforce the top return, which at points you can see is more or less non-existent. But we need this to be solid, because otherwise I'll do all the work and then someone's going to lean on it and it'll just crack all over again. I want to retain as much original detail from the fiberglass pair sections as possible, but things like this section I'm going to smooth down. It's very rough filler, and I think it's deteriorated over the years, and I'm going to run inside now because it started to pour with rain.
After stripping the paint layers back to the fiberglass, John's work revealed a significant amount of damage done to the dome. This looks suspiciously like the result of a heavy impact, and one event which matches the damage perfectly is when this Dalek is hurled down the lift shaft and the back of its head impacts with the wall. However, the rest of this casing did not end up with Ivan, because this one has a different silver mark. So, it seems that the domes of two different casings were swapped at some point. This photo shows the next stage, once John had carefully filled all the areas of damage, whilst leaving any uneven sections which were authentic to the original casting process. You can see the holes for the gun and arm have been filled, ready to be recut, and the letterbox has been repaired more sympathetically. Here's his next update, once the holes had been cut and the surface had been primed.
Well, here we are. This is where we're at now. We talked about keeping original detail. So you can see, for example, that the joint between the shoulders and the gun box is a bit rough, but that's undamaged. That's how it originally was. A lot of the damage to the lower collar probably happened because the shoulders don't actually fit all that well on the skirt, so I've slightly raised the shoulders on the skirt, and I'll put some felt on the inside of the collar to provide some protection to both parts. I've reconstructed the tops of the neck rods, which are fairly rough anyway, but in general I think it's turned out pretty well. I just need to refill a few bits I missed on the first pass, then a load of high build primer, and we should be good to start painting.
After his final prep work, he painted the surface with diligent attention to the correct shades of paint, and the result is an absolutely glorious restoration of the original prop. It looks as good, if not better, than the day it was rolled out of the workshops. This dummy is the only one of its kind known to survive from the batch of 10 that were constructed, and in fact it is the oldest surviving movie prop of any kind. John Green and I are very thankful to Ivan and John Kelly for allowing us such a detailed look at this remarkable rarity.